Trump's insurrection impeachment lawyer, David Schoen, insisted that Trump opposed that violence, that Trump's words were merely encouraging those armed fans to engage in peaceful and civic action, not storming the Capitol violently.
President Trump did not incite the horrific, terrible riots of January 6th. The violence and looting goes against the law and order message he conveyed to every citizen of the United States throughout his presidency, including on January 6th. You knew what the president really meant. He meant that the crowd should demand action from members of Congress and support primary challenges to those who don't do what he considered to be right.
Did then President Trump's request boil down to supporting only primary challenges? That is not what those now convicted Trump fans believed. They were chanting the president sent them. It's not what the militias believed. It's not what top Trump aides believed, as they wrote down and admitted plots to overturn the lawful election result, not just support primary candidates in the future. And apparently it is not what Trump believed. After that trial, after that remark was made, Donald Trump went on to vow pardons for the criminal trespassers and violent criminals, a lawless endorsement of their actual crimes on his apparent behalf. He said if he wins again, he would issue those pardons in the future. So whatever one thought or claimed then, this is the kind of defense that did not age well, especially against the over 150 pages of new evidence released Monday, with more of this January 6th report slated to come out tomorrow. If Trump aides or Trump himself face indictments on this evidence, they'll need a lot more than talk of primary challenges, or that he always supported law and order, as his fans battered police, and then he vowed to pardon them after they did that. Makes you wonder what that insurrection impeachment lawyer would say right now. And we aim to go to the source around here, and we turn now to Trump impeachment defense lawyer David Schoen, a criminal defense and civil rights lawyer, who's represented Trump aide Steve Bannon as well. Welcome, David. Trump was not talking about primary challenges that day. He vows pardons for people who stormed the Capitol. How do you respond to all of this damning evidence now?
I think some of the response will be just what it was then. I think we'll be pointing to the words of his speech in which he called for peaceful demonstrations. That always seems to be omitted from the story.
Then why pardon the violent ones?
I don't know that he would pardon the violent ones, quite frankly.
He vowed to pardon them.
Can I? Yeah. Well, he'll pardon those. If he is in that position again, he'll pardon the people who he believes deserve being pardoned. Listen, a premise to all of this is, of course, I understand that Donald Trump believes with his heart and soul that the election was stolen from him, and he acted based on that belief of his.
We can get into that belief. I just want to get you on the record. We can get into that belief. We have time. But just on that point, vowing to pardon the people who stormed the Capitol, the special people, as he said, is a long ways from your claim that this was about supporting future primary challenges, is it not?
If you're talking about people who committed violence that day, that's a different story. He doesn't believe that all of the people who, what you call, stormed the Capitol that day committed violent acts. And so he would differentiate between the two of them. Listen,
right, well,
I can't speak 100% today.
Let's pick on that, and then I'll let you continue. You're saying what I said, storm. No. What the federal courts have convicted in over 400 cases is breaking the law. I imagine as a lawyer, you don't support people breaking federal criminal law to go into the Capitol during the certification. You don't support that. That's what I'm referring to. Why pardon that? How do you defend that?
Well, first of all, a pardon wouldn't be triggered unless someone had been convicted, as you well know. But
no, you can have a preemptive pardon. If you want to talk law with me, you can have a preemptive pardon. You don't have to wait for conviction.
You can have a preemptive pardon. That's right. That's right.
Go on.
Anyway, so I can only go back to the same point I've made. He would distinguish between those people who committed violence and those people who didn't, those people who were caught up in it. Many people pled guilty because they were incarcerated for a long period of time. They thought unfairly. And so pleading guilty was a better course of action to them, but they didn't commit acts of violence. Those are the kind of people I think would be,
but that's
he would
not,
think would be deserving
again,
of pardon.
I don't want to over-lawyer it, but that's not supporting a primary challenge in a future election, is it?
That's not, but saying that he would support a primary challenge in a future election is saying that he supports a primary challenge in a future election. You're taking two different quotes. One, the fact that he would support a pardon doesn't mean that he wouldn't also support the lawful process of a primary challenge.
Yes, but what's important for the record is in the insurrection impeachment defense, you made the claim that his words that day were only about fighting those primary challenges. That didn't turn out to be true.
Well, I didn't say they were only about that. What I said is, though, and I stand by this, in his speech, he called for peaceful demonstrations. That can't be, we can't just overlook and pick and choose with the speech. Now, how other people took that also is beyond his control. But I'd like to just back up 1 second, something that's, to me, a broader point on your story tonight. And I know you may object to it, and please, I know you won't hesitate to tell me so. I think that part of what has to be said here is that it's the process that happened here that many people are offended by. If, as I believe, and I know you do, the events of January 6th were significant events in our history, momentous events in our history, then I believe the American people deserved a full and fair investigation by a conflict-free, independent body. Now, you can say Mr. McCarthy screwed up with that also. I might agree with that. But of all people on earth, why choose Chairman Thompson to head up this investigative committee when he filed a lawsuit personally attacking President Trump and saying that he was responsible?
I understand that you have issues with the committee.
I'd like to make the point.
Evidence. Well, finish your point, sir. I understand. People are familiar with this point. You don't like the committee's investigation. But we want to talk about the evidence, not whether you want to impugn a bipartisan committee. But go ahead and finish your point, sir.
There's nothing bipartisan about this committee, first of all. But secondly, no, what I say is of all of the people who are possible candidates, Chairman Thompson had a lawsuit just before he became chairman specifically about the events of January 6th, specifically accusing President Trump of causing him personal injuries. How on earth can you expect the American public to accept that as a fair chairman of an investigation?
David.
Raskin and Schiff have written
I didn't know.
books.
I thought you were going to go somewhere more credible. If there is a violent
that's
attack
not credible? Is there anything about
sir,
that that's not a fact?
If there's a violent attack on Congress, sir, that is led and summoned by the then outgoing loser of the election, then President Trump, then everyone in Congress is going to have a stake in that. And you're suggesting that a co-equal branch should be conflicted out because the Trump fans who battered the police and went into the Congress, and you're trying to play word games about the vow to pardon them, that is a conflict for Congress. I find that not credible. That's the nicest way I can say it. Let me point you to
It's a conflict for Chairman Thompson
let me point
specifically.
You to some evidence.
It's a chairman for Raskin and Schiff who have written books about.
Let me point you to some evidence.
I didn't make the point. You perverted the point that I made.
No,
you said that I said Congress was conflicted.
Yes,
I spoke about the specific members who were chosen to, and Schiff and Raskin. They've written books about the events. They have a personal interest in hawking those books and ensuring that the committee comes out with
You made that point, and you got a factual counterpoint, and people heard it. Let's look at some evidence. January 2nd, Donald Trump was on the phone with Jim Jordan and others, according to this new evidence we have from the committee, and they were planning this march to the Capitol, but they also wanted to keep it secret, so they had the element of surprise. Knowing that now, I assume you didn't know that when you argued the case, but knowing that now, is it incriminating for Donald Trump that he planned to move these people from the ellipse to the Capitol and to do so in a way that would be a surprise to his own government, to his own federal government, to the security services? Why keep that secret? Isn't that damning?
I don't necessarily accept the factual premise, but even if it were accurate and that phone call happened and that was the plan, no, I think it's consistent with his call for peaceable demonstrations. Again,
why keep it a secret?
He believed the election was stolen from him.
But you know it was a secret because they didn't announce it. The evidence shows in text, in writing, Trump aides. I mean, you can conflict what you want, but they were writing about how the president wants to do this but wants to keep it a surprise. So why keep it a secret?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't consider it to be damning that it was kept a surprise, if it were kept a surprise.
Okay. Let me play you Cassie Hutchinson. This made a lot of waves, and it seemed to suggest that, again, Donald Trump was physically clashing with his own aides trying to get to the Capitol. He wanted to get to the Capitol. There's texts that also support the general thrust of this. Take a listen to Cassie Hutchinson's testimony.
The president said something to the effect of, "I'm the effing president. Take me up to the Capitol now." The president reached up towards the front of the vehicle to grab at the steering wheel. Mr. Trump then used his free hand to lunge towards Bobby Engel.
Was it wrong for the president to try to get to the Capitol, given what he knew about armed supporters and then what was unfolding there?
With all due respect to Ms. Hutchison, what's wrong is for the American people to be presented with testimony that's not subject to cross-examination. As I would imagine you know, there's a dispute about what happened during those events. This is the problem with not having a ranking minority member on a committee. There's no insulation. There's no cross-examination. There's no testing of credibility. So I don't accept as true any testimony that's not subject to cross-examination. That's part of why I say the process is so important.
Let me ask you, because you also represented Steve Bannon, by that logic, if this is something where you want other views in there, why not have more individuals cooperate? About 30 people pled the Fifth Amendment, which is their constitutional right, but also raises questions about the other claim you're making. You know, a lot of your arguments seem to go on both sides. It's like, well, there should be more testimony, but you're representing people who took great legal risks to avoid cooperating.
Well, I didn't say there should be more testimony there. I said there should be cross-examination. People didn't cooperate, many of them, because they felt the committee was a complete sham, a political show trial. By the way, not just those people. Last month, the Washington Post reported that the committee staffers were complaining that Representative Cheney was making this Cheney 2024 campaign, that the focus was singularly on Donald Trump rather than on fact-finding. 2 days ago, ABC reported Liz Cheney said the goal is to get Donald Trump from ever holding office again. And you said earlier that the mainstream media seems to be ignoring it now or not speaking out so loudly. Wall Street Journal spoke out pretty loudly about it today when they said this risks taking the scourge of criminalizing political differences to new heights. That's a pretty strong statement.
Well, I think one
that's
issue,
part of my answer.
I appreciate you. Look, I appreciate you taking the questions here as someone who's defended Trump in the impeachment process. But when you keep attacking process and the committee, you seem like you don't want to discuss the evidence. And that makes you look a little bit like some of these recalcitrant witnesses.